go through that with you.
Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is we're going to use the data to identify some similarities and differences between the acute responses for both types of training. So the acute responses for the aerobic and the resistance. If we go up to our data, so here we are at our data, if we look at some of the acute responses, what we experienced, there's one similarity is that you can see that breathing rate and heart rate, both breathing rate and heart rate, increase in both of these exercises, aerobic and resistance. Okay, so it's continually increasing. However, what you will notice is a significant difference in the numbers. So you can see that there's 110 when you start off when you're doing your resistance training. However, when you're doing aerobic training, we've got here that there's 155 beats per minute. Likewise with your breathing rate, when you do your resistance training it's 33, but it's 44 when you're doing your aerobic training. And then if we look at our Borg scale, actually when we're doing resistance training it's increasing all the time, almost to the point of fatigue, whereas with our aerobic training you're almost hitting a plateau, so you're kind of finding a level and you're sustaining and working at that level. So if we go down to here, what would we say? So one of the first bullet points we could talk about is, look, the similarities are that both breathing rate and heart rate increase during both exercises. However, there is a significant difference in the fact that the amount they increase changes, and you would need to give me a reason why that happens. Okay, and that would cover you for your first bullet point. For the second, why were there some acute responses different to two types of training? Well, we've just talked about that actually. So the acute responses are different in the fact that how much they increase. So why is your aerobic heart rate considerably higher than your resistance heart rate? All right, and that would answer you that bullet point. Use the data to show similarities and differences between the long-term exercise responses for the two types of training. Same process. Okay, and you'll find that there's similar things. Okay, so you just use this column, the 3-month predicted column. All right, and we can see that actually both our heart rates have declined from the original score that we got. Why? Probably because we've had cardiac hypertrophy take place. Okay, which means that there's an increase in stroke volume and cardiac output. However, again, we still see a significant difference in that. So why is there a significant difference in the numbers? One thing I can see here from the data me and Joe have is that with the aerobic training we've got more of a consistent RPE, which means that the runner or the participant has become familiar with the exercise, so they're able to sustain that level for a long period of time. What we still see with the resistance is that there's a fatigue and a drop off because it increases. So you could talk about that in terms of the difference, and that would answer this bullet point here. Okay. Finally, the last bullet point, why would the different types of training see different responses in long-term adaptations? Well, we kind of already answered that, but you can put a small paragraph on the end and tell me why aerobic training results are slightly different to the resistance training results, and give me a summary. This bit's pretty easy. All you're going to look at is were the two training methods easy to carry out, and just explain if they were why, and analyse why they might be. So first of all, you might consider the space. I know that Joe talked about when you did your resistance training, you used the sports hall and you did a circuit type session. So was that easy to set out? Was it easy to conduct? Were the timings accurate? And what equipment and facilities did you use? Was that appropriate for a resistance training method, or would there be a better place, space, time to do it, i.e. a gym? And what would that do? Because often when we do circuit training, we might get results that almost reflect some level of aerobic training, because we're working really, really hard, having a really short break and working again. However, if we're in the gym, we're probably doing 10 reps, giving ourselves 30 seconds to a minute rest, and we might get a different type of result. So you might want to talk about actually some of the equipment and facilities could have been different, and why would that change your investigation. When we move on, this is this is almost the last part. There's one bit after this. We're going to review the advantages and disadvantages of the physiological investigation. So the first thing is to consider the tests used within the data collection process. So when we look at heart rate, breathing rate and RPE, were they easy to carry out? And most of us would say yes. Okay. However, what were the advantages of the data collection process? So you've already said it's easy. Why is that a benefit? But what are the disadvantages? When you did your heart rate, was it at that moment that you finished exercise, or was there a prolonged period between the time that you finished the exercise and the time that you took your heart rate? So is it an accurate reading of your heart rate in exercise? Probably not. Okay. Same with breathing rate. Okay. So could we change that? And if we would, what would we do? Were the two types of training activities useful to collect data on? So you could talk about your aerobic. Was it useful to collect data on? Did you give your maximum? Did it give a true reflection of what your aerobic capacity is? And could circuit training be different? Could we go in the gym and do some different format of resistance training? And how would that make the data look different? Are there any factors that made the data collection unreliable or inaccurate? So we talked about that time lapse between the period. Maybe it's about people's competence in terms of how they carry out the tests. Are they able to find the heart rate or the pulse immediately to take it, or do they sometimes miss a beat? And what could have been better, and why could it have made the investigation better? So you might want to consider some of the things that could have been better and make suggestions. The last bit is to consider how and why you change the physiological testing or training methods. So would you change the physiological tests and the training methods? If so, give details on how and why you change it. So we talked already about being a circuit. Why would we change it to a gym? What would that be? How would that be beneficial to our investigation? How might it make the data look different? Okay. We also talked about some of the methods. So when we talked about heart rate, we said actually, we're physically doing it with our fingers and finding our pulse. However, we could consider using a heart rate monitor. Okay. If we used a heart rate monitor, what would that give us? Okay. How could we track breathing rate differently? Is RP a really good method to measure how hard we're working, or is it quite subjective to what we're thinking at the time? Okay, I would consider looking up some tests. So you might want to look up something like a Douglas bag and what that is, or a Wingate test, and consider why you might use some of these other tests to enhance and advance your investigation. Another one to consider is maybe even blood lactate. Okay, so you could look at some of these testing methods and think about how you'd advance your physiological testing in the future and give reason why you change it to these. Okay, that's pretty much all of it. Don't worry about this last bit. This is for me and Joe to fill out. So once you've completed it, please make sure you submit it on the 3rd of June, which is a Sunday, the Sunday before we come back. Myself or Joe will send you a text on the Thursday just to remind you, or Friday, and then we'll see you back very shortly, very soon. Thank you.